Breaking news from Iran, and this situation is escalating fast. The Islamic Republic is facing its biggest internal crisis in years, with nationwide protests spreading across more than 100 cities. A complete internet blackout cutting the country off from the world, and President Donald Trump issuing direct military threats to Throne's leadership. We're watching a powder keg that could explode at any moment. What started as demonstrations over soaring bread prices has morphed into something far more dangerous, a direct challenge to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei's grip on power. And here's what makes this different. Trump isn't just watching from the sidelines. He's drawn a red line, warning Iran that if protesters are killed, the United States will strike hard. In the next 17 minutes, we're breaking down exactly what's happening on the ground, why Trump's warnings carry unprecedented weight, and what this crisis means for global stability. This is Conway Analysis. Here's what just happened. On December 28, 2025, Iran's currency, the real, collapsed to a historic low of 1.4 million rials to $1. Overnight, the prices of basic goods like cooking oil and chicken spiked so dramatically that shopkeepers in Thrawn's historic Grand Bazaar, a merchant class that has traditionally supported the regime for over 4 decades, shut their doors in protest. Within 48 hours, demonstrations erupted across the country. By January 9, 2026, the protests had spread to more than 100 cities spanning 8 provinces. According to human rights activist news agency, at least 62 people have been killed since the demonstrations began, including 48 protesters and 14 security personnel. Amnesty International has independently confirmed at least 28 deaths, all shot by security forces. More than 2,300 people have been detained, many held incommunicado without access to lawyers or family. And it gets worse. On the night of January 8th, Iranian authorities implemented a near-total communications blackout. The internet was shut down nationwide. International phone lines were cut. The regime essentially pulled Iran offline, leaving nearly 90 million people isolated from the outside world. NetBlocks, the global internet monitoring organization, confirmed that connectivity dropped to single-digit percentages. Major airlines from Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar canceled at least 17 flights to Iranian cities, citing security concerns. This isn't just about economics anymore. Verified videos reviewed by Reuters and BBC Persian show protesters in Thrawn, Mashhad, Shiraz, and Kurdish majority cities like Ilam chanting "Death to Khamenei." And this is the last battle. Pahlavi will return. Direct challenges to the supreme leader and calls for the return of the monarchy overthrown in 1979. We're witnessing what multiple Iran analysts are calling the most significant threat to the Islamic Republic's survival since its founding. Here's the human face of this crisis. Taha Safari, a 16-year-old boy from Azna in Loristan province, went missing during protests on January 1st. When his family went to a police station on January 3rd to inquire about his whereabouts, officials showed them photographs of deceased individuals. They identified their son among the dead, his body showing severe head injuries. The authorities continue to withhold his remains. To understand why this situation is so explosive, we need to examine 3 critical factors converging simultaneously: economic collapse, political fracture, and external pressure. First, the economic devastation. Iran's inflation rate topped 40% in December 2025. According to the country's own central bank data, the rial lost half its value against the dollar throughout 2025. But here's the kicker. The spark that ignited these protests wasn't just general inflation. On December 27th, Iran's central bank ended a subsidy program that had allowed certain importers to access US dollars at preferential rates compared to the open market. Within 24 hours, shopkeepers across Thrawn faced impossible choices: dramatically raise prices, close their shops, or operate at devastating losses. The Bazaris, Thrawn's traditional merchant class, chose option 2. And this decision carries enormous historical significance. Let me explain why with a crucial piece of context. For more than 100 years of Iranian history, the Bazaris have been kingmakers. Their financial support for the clerical class was instrumental in overthrowing the Shah during the 1979 Islamic Revolution. As Professor Arangasharzian from New York University notes, they've been loyal to the Islamic Republic for decades. When the Bazaris turn against the regime, it's not just economic protest, it's a withdrawal of legitimacy by one of the system's traditional pillars of support. Second, the political fracture within Iran's leadership. President Masoud Pezeshkian, elected in 2024 on promises of economic relief and pragmatic foreign policy, has called for authorities to take a kind and responsible approach to protesters. He described their economic grievances as legitimate, but Pezeshkian's authority is severely limited. Supreme Leader Khamenei holds ultimate control over all security decisions, and his response has been dramatically different. In his first public comment since protests began, KA declared on January 9th that the Islamic Republic will not back down in the face of vandals. He accused demonstrators of destroying property just to please the President of the United States. This split reveals a regime struggling with internal contradictions. A reformist-minded president unable to prevent a violent crackdown because the real power rests with unelected clerics and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Third, and perhaps most critically, the external pressure from the United States and recent history. Here's where Trump's warnings gained their teeth. Just 6 months ago, in June 2025, the United States and Israel conducted a 12-day military campaign against Iran, bombing nuclear facilities in what marked the first direct American strikes on Iranian territory. That campaign demonstrated something Iranian leadership had long doubted: Washington's willingness to use overwhelming military force. Now, Trump has issued multiple escalating warnings. In a radio interview with Hugh Hewitt aired January 8th, Trump stated, "Iran has been told very strongly, even more strongly than I'm speaking to you right now, that if they do that, they're going to have to pay hell." The next day, at a meeting with oil executives, he was even more direct. "You better not start shooting because we'll start shooting too." He specifically said the U.S. would strike Iran where it hurts, but clarified there would be no boots on the ground. Why does this matter? Consider the recent context. On January 4th, 2026, U.S. Special Forces conducted a dramatic raid that resulted in the seizure of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, an operation that stunned the international community. Multiple Arab diplomats speaking anonymously to the Washington Post confirmed that Iranian leadership views the Venezuela operation as evidence that Trump's threats aren't bluster. The message received in Tehran is clear. This administration is willing to act decisively against adversarial governments. The geographic pattern of violence reveals the regime's calculated strategy. BBC Persian's verification team confirmed that in Throne itself, security forces have shown unusual restraint during large demonstrations. For several hours on the night of January 8th, police in districts with massive crowds largely avoided direct confrontation. But this restraint is strategic, not humanitarian. In smaller cities and provinces, particularly in Kurdish-majority regions like Loristan, Elam, and Kermanshah, the crackdown has been swift and lethal. At least 21 of the confirmed deaths occurred in these regions where security forces fired directly at protesters, according to verified video evidence analyzed by BBC Persian. This dual approach reveals the regime's concern about international perception. Tehran knows the world is watching the capital. Brutal crackdowns broadcast from the capital city carry far greater political costs than violence in provincial areas with limited media access. Let's break down who's affected by this escalating crisis, because the ripple effects extend far beyond Iran's borders. For ordinary Iranians, the situation is dire. Families across the country are facing catastrophic purchasing power collapse. A teacher in Tehran who spoke with CNN anonymously described buying chicken for her family. 3 weeks ago, I could buy a whole chicken for 800,000 rials. Last week, the same chicken cost 1.5 million rials. This week, there is no chicken in the store at all. Medical professionals in Elam and Loristan provinces told Amnesty International that injured protesters are avoiding hospitals entirely, fearing arrest by security forces stationed at medical facilities. One protester in Kaluya and Boyar Ahmad province, who was shot with metal pellets, chose not to seek treatment despite risk of losing his leg because, in his words, going to the hospital means going to prison. The psychological toll is equally devastating. An 18-year-old student from Esfahan told researchers that an agent pushed her to the ground during a protest and stomped on her back repeatedly. "The more I struggled, the harder he pressed down," she said. "I couldn't move. I cried out, but he told me to shut up." These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a systematic pattern documented by human rights organizations. For regional stability, this crisis creates dangerous uncertainty. Iran's fragmented external opposition, including Crown Prince Raza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah, has called for coordinated nationwide demonstrations. Some protesters have chanted, "This is the last battle, Pahlavi will return." Though the extent of actual monarchist support inside Iran remains disputed among analysts. Trump notably refused to meet with PIV when asked, stating, "I'm not sure that it would be appropriate at this point to do that as president. I think that we should let everybody go out there and we see who emerges." This wait-and-see approach suggests the administration is hedging its bets on which opposition faction might ultimately prevail. For international markets, the potential for a new Iran conflict comes at a precarious time. Oil prices have already shown volatility based on Middle East tensions throughout 2025. Energy analysts at Bloomberg Economics note that any U.S. military strikes on Iran, particularly targeting oil infrastructure, could send crude prices spiking. Iran produces approximately 3 million barrels per day and controls the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 21% of global petroleum passes. Even the threat of conflict in this region carries significant economic weight. Dr. Vi Nasser, professor of Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University, told The Washington Post, "The sense of hopelessness in Iranian society is something today that we haven't seen before. That sense of anger has just deepened over the years, and we are at record new levels in terms of how Iranian society is upset." But he also warned against expecting rapid regime collapse. "We haven't even seen a fraction of the regime's oppressive forces. I just foresee much greater violence in the future." European leaders are also expressing concern. On January 9th, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and French President Emmanuel Macron issued a rare joint statement condemning reported deadly violence against protesters and urging Iran to allow its citizens to express themselves without fear of reprisal. The United Nations spokesperson Stefan Dujarric stated the organization was very disturbed by the loss of life, emphasizing that people anywhere in the world have a right to demonstrate peacefully. The convergence of internal economic collapse, political legitimacy crisis, and external military pressure creates what multiple analysts describe as an unprecedented vulnerability for the Islamic Republic. Expert assessments of this crisis paint a stark picture. Dana Esfandiri, Middle East lead for Bloomberg Economics, told CNN something remarkable. It's reached a boiling point. I anticipate that the Islamic Republic that we're seeing today is one unlikely to see 2027. I really think there is going to be some change. That's not hyperbole from a fringe commentator. That's a mainstream economic analyst predicting regime change within the next 12 months. Sam Vackwell, director of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House, added, "These protests, whatever the outcome, will no doubt further damage an already fractured legitimacy for a state that I think is at the end of its life. But not everyone agrees the end is imminent." Alerza Ender, an independent Iran analyst, offered a more cautious assessment. "It's not just based on common. There's a vast bureaucracy at play as well. I just foresee much greater violence in the future." His point underscores a critical reality. Authoritarian systems don't collapse simply because they lose popular support. They possess sophisticated security apparatuses designed precisely for moments like this. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a statement on January 9th, reported by state media agency TASN, warning that the preservation of Iran's government is their red line and reserving the right to retaliation. Tehran's chief prosecutor announced that those committing sabotage or engaging in clashes with security forces would face the death penalty, a threat designed to create maximum deterrent effect. In terms of short-term consequences, we're looking at several immediate scenarios. First, the communications blackout creates a fog of war that benefits the regime. Without internet access or phone connectivity, protesters cannot coordinate effectively, and the international community cannot document abuses in real time. Second, the regime appears to be implementing a selective geography strategy. Restraint in Thrawn, where international eyes are focused. Lethal force in provinces where documentation is harder. Within the next 30 to 90 days, expert consensus suggests three possible trajectories: escalation to full scale crackdown with mass casualties, similar to the 2019 protests that killed over 1,500 people; negotiated de escalation with economic concessions and limited political reforms; or external intervention if the death toll crosses thresholds that trigger Trump's stated red lines. The medium-term scenario over 6 to 12 months hinges on whether Trump follows through on his threats. If Iranian security forces kill protesters en masse and Trump does not respond militarily, his credibility takes a devastating hit. If he does respond, we're looking at a potential military conflict with unpredictable consequences for regional stability, oil markets, and American strategic positioning. The Venezuela president looms large, having demonstrated willingness to conduct regime change operations. The administration now faces expectations that it will act on its stated commitments to Iranian protesters. Let's recap the three most critical points. First, Iran is experiencing its most significant internal crisis since 1979, with economic collapse converging with political legitimacy fracture. Second, Trump has issued unprecedented direct military threats tied to protester casualties, and recent actions in Venezuela suggest these aren't empty warnings. Third, the regime's response strategy of selective geography restraint reveals concern about international perception while conducting lethal crackdowns outside media spotlight. Here's your key takeaway. We're witnessing a genuine test of whether authoritarian systems can weather perfect storms of internal discontent and external pressure. The next few weeks will determine whether 2026 marks a turning point in Middle East power dynamics or another brutal suppression that extends the Islamic Republic's survival. What do you think Trump should do if Iran's security forces conduct mass killings of protesters? Does the United States have a responsibility to intervene, or would military action create worse outcomes? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay informed on stories the mainstream media won't fully cover, make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon. The situation in Iran is evolving rapidly, and we'll continue tracking every development as this crisis unfolds. This could reshape the entire Middle East balance of power, or it could end like past Iranian protests with brutal suppression and international inaction. Thanks for watching Conflict Radar Updates. अगर आपको ये अपडेट हेल्पफुल लगा हो तो लाइक ज़रूर करें और सब्सक्राइब करके बेल आइकॉन ऑन कर दें ताकि आपको डेली ब्रेकिंग जियोपॉलिटिकल अपडेट्स मिलते रहें। अपनी ओपिनियन कमेंट में ज़रूर बताएं। आपके हिसाब से नेक्स्ट क्या होने वाला है। सी यू इन द नेक्स्ट अपडेट।